Good evening. Thank you for your coming. My name is Mehdi Azayez. I'm postdoctoral fellow at the University of Notre Dame in Islamic Studies. I'm the co-director, along with Professor Gabriel Said Reynolds, of the Qur'an Seminar, a project going on throughout this academic year dedicated to advancing our scholarly understanding of the Quranic text. As you know, our goal of this project is to propose a series of public lectures by leading Muslim intellectuals. Yesterday, I had the pleasure and the honor to introduce Naila Tabara, who gave us a deep and profound reflection on the Quran and the Christians-Muslim dialogue. This evening, I have also the pleasure to introduce another prominent Muslim intellectual woman. Our guest tonight is Maryam Mosharraf. Maryam Mosharraf is Associate Professor of Persian Language and Literature at Shahid Beheshti University in Iran. As said my dear friend Gabriel Said Reynolds, Professor Gabriel Said Reynolds, Maryam Mosharraf personifies the flowering of scholarship in contemporary Iran and the prominent role that women have played in this development. We are particularly exciting that a scholar who is well known in Iran will be building a bridge with American audiences through her lecture at Notre Dame. Maryam Mosharraf earned her doctoral degree from Alame Tabatabai University in Tehran in 2000. She is a well-known expert on Quranic exegesis and Sufism. The title of her dissertation is Analyzing the Development of Sufi Through the Mystical Exegesis of Qur'an up to the 6th century, awarded of the best dissertation in Persian language and literature. In addition to her knowledge and expertise in mystical exegesis of the Qur'an, she's also an expert in Persian language and literature, reflected by her impressive bibliography written in Persian and English. Among her works, which include 12 books and more than 30 articles, I would like to quote 2 books on Qur'an and mysticism: The Semiotics of the Qur'an Exegesis, an hermeneutic approach to mysticism, 2002, and a second book, The Ba'a Valad, a translation in Persian of a book in German by Fritz Meyer, awarded of the best translation 2002, one book on literary criticism, among others, an handbook of literary criticism, which won the prize of the Women Cultural Festival in 2006. It's already finished. Books on poetry. Sorry. Oh. Everyone hear me? It's okay? Oh. I can't speak. Yes, also books on poetry and mystical poetry, and among them a translation in Persian of collected papers on the honor of Professor Shimel, a specialist of mystical tradition in Islam, which won Rumi Heritage Prize in 2007. All those works underline the tremendous scholar she is, who has a knowledge at Iranian and Western scholarship. But before we have the chance to listen to her, I would like to add that our dear guest will speak 40 or 45 minutes, and we will have the possibility to, you will have the possibility to ask questions during 15 or 20 minutes. So tonight we have the pleasure to listen to Maryam for her lecture titled The Qur'an and Islamic Mysticism and Sufi Exegesis, the Liberating Power of Language. I'm sure you all join me in welcoming Professor Maryam Mosharraf. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Maryam Mosharraf. I came from Iran to talk about Qur'an exegesis. I want to thank you all. I know these days you're preparing for your studies and final exams. I really thank you for coming and attending here to listen to my talk. Very thank you, especially Professor Gabriel Reiners, who made all this possible and who invited me. Professor Reynolds is the leader of the Quran Seminar, a work of interfaith, which this is my honor to be a part of that. Thank you, Mehdi, for your very exaggerating introducing, and thank you, Claire, for your support, and thank all of you. I had always something in my mind about this quarreling that I saw from a very early age in my country and even all over the world between clerics and Sufis. And I wonder, well, they are all Muslims. What is all the fuss about? And when I was invited to talk about something relevant on commentaries, I decided to work on this topic. And that's what I'm going to say tonight. This is the history of Sufism. It's the story of a constant struggle between the two main ideas in the history of Islam in general. So, these two, excuse me, I'm trying to, yeah. These two special versions of Islam is esoteric and exoteric approaches to Qur'an. On the one hand, there are exoteric Islamic orthodoxy, the formal clerics. On the other hand, there are Gnostics who posing against them. And so what is their quarrel about? According to Qur'an, we have verses that say there are in Qur'an something that nobody knows the accurate meaning of that except by God and the real scholars. ما لا يعلم تأويله إلا الله والراسخون في العلم. So, who are these real scholars? Clerics regard the hint of this verse to themselves. They say, we are the people who understand the real meaning of Quran. Because they believe that Quran and Revelation is a historical event, and every verse has a historical base. So we should consider Quran as an objective event. And we have to explain all verses on such a basic and such a objective basis, referring to historical or linguistic facts. It means to explain the occasion on which the verses has been revealed and the historical event that led to the revelation. On the other hand, the scholars intended to explain the linguistic aspects of Quran. It means morphologic and syntactic dexterities and the semantic layers of different verses. So far, we have two approaches among the clerics. In one approach, they are trying to explain the historical background of the verses, and in other genre of tafsir, they are trying to explain the text in lingual aspect. So what are the morphology and syntax and semantic layers? How can we get through the text? Unlike the legalists, so we have two approaches of Quran. Unlike the legalists, the mystics believe that explaining the literal signification and semantic aspects of Quranic text may be useful for common folk, but would not satisfy the taste of elite. So in their relation to God, they need something more to derive from Quran. However, what was the reason? Why should it make such a rage and anger of exoteric clerics? Did they feel resentment because they saw this way of interpretation of Quran? I mean, the personal view and having a personal approach to Quran, similar to methods used in biblical interpretations. For example, we can explain it by some examples. We have different verses in Quran that can be interpreted historically and not historically. For example, in this verse of Surah Tawbah, فَأَنزَلَ اللَّهُ سَكِينَتَهُ عَلَيْهِ وَأَيَّدَهُ بِجُنُودٍ لَمْ تَرَوْهَا. Armies that are not seen have been sent to help Prophet Muhammad. What are these armies? Why do not we see them? So usually the clerics refer of this verse to confrontation between Muhammad and his enemies, when God sends the angels to help him. Either it can be the event of Badr or the cave where he was in company with Abu Bakr. In both cases, he was confronting his enemies. But Sufis have a different reading of the verse. They consider that this help is the support of God to the real believers in their path, so as not to go astray. These armies are patience that he gives them to tolerate the overwhelming visionary experiences, or shukr, having thanks toward God. So, for clerics, it seems too much arbitrary, because they want to consider all verses as a historical or very objective thing, and the interpretation should be derived out of the text or the outer word, something that has happened. Well, as it can be seen here, there is a new aspect added to the formal traditional. As we saw in objective exegesis, this is the personal element or subjectivity that is added here, that we lack in the two first type of tafsir. Because when we are talking about history, it is important, but we make no room for the subjectivity and the mind of the reader. So this element is added, and the mystical interpretation of Quran does not aim to explain the connection between the text and the outside world. Rather, it explains the verse according to the Gnostic state of mind. Personalizing the tafsir gives it an individuality which the clerics were and still are afraid of, because they see their own power and this exclusively power of them in danger. Well, explaining all tropes that and all tricks that the Sufis have in announcing a new language of interpretation of Qur'an needs several, actually, series of lectures. They have grammatical tropes, they have special playing in the context, and a mystical language. So this mystical language gradually becomes as a war machine. Excuse me, this is the exegetical model had been configured as early as 8th century, but it was not earlier than the beginning of the 3rd century that the great Sufi and author Sulami from Neshabur composed the first compilation of Sufi exegesis and Sufi exegetic sayings based on the quotation from 100 famous Gnostics up to his time. It was Sulami that wrote the first Sufi exegetical work. In an introduction to his book, Sulami announced the exegesis of the language of the truth, Lisan al-Haqiqa, the language of truth, and put the speakers of this language in a higher rank in comparison to the traditional interpreter. That's why Ibn Taymiyyah believes having this book or reading it to be blasphemous. However, this new language was gradually accepted among different parts of intellectual society, Muslim society. A clear instance of such approaches to Qur'an may be the conversation between God and Moses. When God is talking to Moses, asking him, "What is in your hand, Moses?" And he says, "This is my stick. I lean on it." Well, it is strange. Does not God know what in the hand of Moses is? Well, some interpreters have considered this a rhetorical question and have suggested different justifications that, for example, Tabari says that God wanted to extinguish the fear, the horror of confrontation and the audition of God from heart of Moses, for example. So he is initiating a conversation with Moses to give him calm and cool down. But Gnostics have a different reading. They regard the stick a metaphor which indicates the reliance on others, because Moses says, "I lean on it." So it is as a metaphor of leaning on something else rather than God. The great mystic of 9th century Al-Hallaj says God wanted to make Moses notice the harm of dependence on other things rather than God, and reminds him by means of questioning that he should just rely on God and nothing else. So, "Ma tilka biyaminika," see it. You are leaning on it. "Hada asaya tawakka'u alayha," I lean on it. So, you shouldn't. There's no doubt that mystical interpretation brought a great potency in tafsir by powerfully using the figurative language, namely using similes, metaphors, symbols, or devices, all devices to convey a point of view. In this type of tafsir, we still rely on a comparison. So, It can be a shape or a color or a situation. In this example, the situation of leaning is the comparison, which is acting like a clue and can lead us towards the intended meaning. As we saw, the stick is a sign of reliance on something other than God. However, this was not enough to express the religious experience, an experience which is naturally very difficult to convey to others or speak about. It is because it is about inward status and personal impression. So it is like love. Can you have a clear-cut definition of what love is? At the same time, we are trying to explain it. We are not trying to, and I'm not trying to underestimate the power of metaphorical commentaries or the great role that they had in the development of Quranic studies during time. When I say it is not enough or it's not sufficient, I don't mean that it is not important. Muslim thinkers were aware of the importance of linguistic approach in their hermeneutical studies, and they did write many books in this field even earlier than 11th century, when Abdul Qahir Jurjani created a new theory of context about interrelation of the components of the text, and hermeneutics establishing a new theory of linguistic theory in which we can find similarities to the hermeneutical theory of Paul Ricoeur, as the both emphasize the importance of context and texture in exegetical study. So they knew and they worked it a lot. However, when it comes to explaining the unusual spiritual experience and exaltation, these theories seem to be insufficient, since they are still looking through the eyes of rationality and objectivity. As a result, they do not admit enough room for the mind of reader. The Sufis tried to change the rules of rational language, to invent a more passionate and flexible dialogue of their own. Exploring old grammatical truths is not possible here, but I can give another example of chapter Yunus. هو الذي يسيركم في البر والبحر. He it is who makes you travel by land and sea. We are focusing here on the two words. What is land and what is sea? In Sufi exegesis, the land indicates the works of devotion, worshipping God, being good, and conducting as a good believer. This is Bar, desert, the land. While the sea is a symbol of being overwhelmed by rapture and ecstasy. And thus, the first one is the beginning of the spiritual path. But the second one, the Bahr, sea, indicates a higher spiritual rank. And if you want to go further in this spiritual path, you should lean on God and have reliance on Him, because هو الذي يسيركم. He is the one who makes this possible. There is a question may emerge here. This is a question. This is important. If the metaphorical, I know many of you have this question already in your mind. If the metaphorical and Sufi commentaries are both using the figurative language, as we see, the sea is similar to overwhelming, and the stick is similar to leaning on something else. So, if in all these cases we are using figurative language, at least in this limited field, we shall consider them the same and not different. So why do I say there are three genres: historical, linguistic, and mystic? I can put mystic and linguistic in the same category. Why do I not do so? To answer this question, we should say the difference. The difference is in the way we understand the comparison. The comparison is based on a rational understanding of the text or something beyond rationality. Because when you are talking about similarities of shapes, of colors and situation, you can exactly define the comparison. But sometimes this comparison is just understood by personal impression. It is not irrational, but it is rationality and something more, something beyond rationality. So the Sufis started a dangerous linguistic and hermeneutical game, which ended up in the formation of the most difficult and ultimately complicated type of tafsir, which sometimes even seems arbitrary. The hermeneutical genre paved the way for a highly sophisticated language, out of which the most prominent figures of Islamic mysticism, such as Rumi in Persian or Ibn Arabi in Arabic, came out and emerged. And they derive much of their terminology out of that. For instance, in his comment of Aleph, in the word Allah, Aleph, Ibn Arabi says that Aleph is a symbol of independence of God. Because Aleph in Allah does not attach other letters, but all other letters are attached to him. So it signifies the independence of God, but dependence of all creatures on him. This is Ibn Arabi, but by saying so, he is imitating the tafsir of al-Hallaj word by word, like many of, I should say that when I say tafsir of Ibn Arabi, I mean his exegetical assertions that we find among Nusus and Futuhat, not a single book of tafsir Ibn Arabi which does not exist. So by the two types of tafsir, namely the historical and the linguistic, which we say was objective. With these two, we face the problem of how to explain the text. While by mystical commentaries, the question is how to understand it. already in the late 19th century, hermeneutical scholars Dilettai and Schleiermacher pointed out the difference between explaining a text and understanding a text. By explaining a text, the interpreter makes what is said explicit. What is said in the text explicit. So it is historical type and linguistic type. They are both explaining the text. The interpreter makes it explicit, but in understanding the text, we are trying to get closer to the word of writer and reader. So two words, two minds are trying to get near. So by understanding a text should not be anything but reproducing the experience of the writer in the mind of reader. With the work of Schleiermacher and Dilettai, as well as partly Ricoeur and Giorgiani, we are still detached with the text and objectivity. But it was Husserl who took a big step forward and considered this subjectivity as a very important element of any hermeneutical work. The subjective method of Husserl is very suitable for explaining the mystical exegesis. The aim of mystic, as Husserl says about any subjective, but I am trying to put it in the same category with mystical exegesis because in no other way you can explain it, is to explain, the mystic is trying to explain himself or herself, not a text. So the text is a mirror that he sees or she sees herself in this mirror. In such a case, the subjective method believes, Husserl in such an approach believes to be the first goal of any interpretation. By reading Qur'an as well, the mystic reaches a unique understanding which is the result of unveiling and visionary experience, an understanding beyond rationalism. In such a case, not only his mind is detached from space and time, but also has crossed the limits of logical language. In this third type of tafsir, which we said is different from the two objective ones, this third one is subjective. In this third one, we are confronting a floating, uncertain meaning. So we see it is very dangerous as well. The reproduction of the spiritual experience in such a complex text is rather impossible for an ordinary reader. That is why many of Sufi sayings and assertions need to be interpreted by themselves. A great master of early 13th century, Ruzbehan Baqli from Iran, who has written a great mystical tafsir, has written one of his books in explaining and interpreting Sufi exegetic sayings. In the prelude of his book, he introduces 3 levels of language by which the whole corpus of Sufi writing can be characterized. So, when we are starting from the language of truth in 3rd century or 9th, we are going on up to 13th century. It is still, the quarrel is about the language. The first two languages, he says, so it is reflecting his time, are used for articulating an ordinary spiritual knowledge and the Sufi terminology, which he calls the language of soberness, lisan al-sahb. But the third language is the language of intoxication. This last language, he says, belongs to the intoxicated Sufis, who are bestowed the vision of unseen, a vision that makes the former clerics shriek out of outrage and make them attack Sufis. To understand such a language, the reader needs to take part in reproducing the meaning by initiating a creative linguistic play. Interpretation in this case would be striving to understand and to appropriate an alien word. For understanding and appropriating a word of another, we need to know many things. We need to know the explanation. But to reproduce the experience, we need to go up higher than just explaining the text and reach to the level of understanding and reproducing this experience. It is clear now that why the Gnostics insisted on continuation of their exegetic tradition despite all boundaries and restrictions, all killings, torturing of them, or defiance and anything. The mystical approach to Qur'an ends in a polyphony and dialogue, which negates the trite religious univocalism. This is a struggle that reduces the ideological power of orthodox clericalism and gives the tafsir a more multivocal and liberal character, because it makes room for the self, for individual, for personal impression. Thus, the mystical hermeneutic is an effort to push back all authoritarianism, authoritarian claims of those who assume their own concept of religion to be a paradigm, to be the only way of salvation. A struggle between polyphony and having many voices, listening to different voices, and from one hand, and univocalism from other hand, which still such a struggle is going on in the present time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mosharraf, for a beautiful reflection on the mystical manner of reading the Qur'an. And of course, it's provocative because being subjective, it means that every individual person has the ability to discover new truths. And so I invite you as individual people in this room to use the opportunity to ask questions or add your reflection.
No questions? Please.
Okay. There's one here and then others. Yes. Please.
You mentioned Sulamist, tafsir. Do you see in Sulamist tafsir a space for grounding Sunni-Shiite relations?
Yeah, work of mysticism is trying to go toward unity.
Just to rephrase the question because we have so many in the room. So the question is in one particular mystical commentary on the Qur'an by a mystic or Sufi known as Sulami. Would that sort of approach to the Qur'an provide a way of bridging differences between Sunni and Shiite commentary?
As far as we know, and we have texts came down to us, we know many esoteric texts are ascribed to Shiites, like Jafar Sadiq and Imam Ali. But Sufi tafsir is focusing on unifying, and it's going towards unity, wahda. So accepting diversity does not mean that put them apart. I understand this Solam in this way. So there are lots of quotations from Jafar Sadiq in Solami, but Jafar Sadiq himself is not working in his tafsir of Quran. He does not reflect Shia theology, unless you are working very different on him. Right? So you may discover something, but it is not the focus. Is not in differentiating Sunni and Shia. I don't see it this way.
Actually, something. I mean, in physics, and for me, symmetry is beautiful. But you see, can you show these the patterns of the letters here? Can you show they're so beautiful here? I've never seen before. Letters here, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So
You see, I'm a physicist, but I've never seen before. There must be truth. Beautiful. Like symmetry, physicists call it. Right?
Oh, good.
Incredible.
The role of the Arabic letters, maybe,
Yeah.
in the Sufi.
Yeah. Well, we had, Jeff is very old. This is, it goes back to pre-Islamic period. I mean, understanding a sacred meaning in the letters. It is a very old notion, mystical notion. It goes very back in human culture and history. And I think one of different things that Muslims learn from bibliothetical tradition and is Jafr Ahbar. So yes, it is some sacred, very, very different dimensions of sacred understanding.
Even the people in math here, but they're so beautiful, right? Incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
I'd like to insert a question, if I may, because something we hear sometimes about the Islamic mystical tradition is that the role of the religious leader or the sheikh is very important. And if the text is subjective, when you want to understand the text and not only explain it, how important is it to rely on a sheikh who has had some sort of mystical enlightenment and therefore can guide you to this understanding? Or, I ask it a different way, could someone without any guidance from a sheikh come to a mystical understanding of the text? Is the sheikh necessary in that process?
Well, first of all, I wanna consider your question in something that you take for, very natural, that sheikh is a Shiite notion. It is not true, because all great Sufis were Sunnis, not Shia. And they believed in sheikh. So sheikh is someone who leads you, like the symbol of it is Khadr, which accompanied Moses. They consider it a sheikh. And it should not be a Shia. But another part, and the main part of your question, that if it is subjectivity, so what is the role of sheikh? Is it what you're trying to ask? This is so. In this regard, we should consider that role of sheikh is in transferring the ethic of Sufism to the disciple. He is a tutor of the ideology of Sufism. And all the role of Sheikh is just behind experience. Because experience is something quite alone and individual. And it happens in the heart of any of us can happen. And it happens in the heart of mystic quite alone, without needing any sheikh or anybody else. But it is like when you remind me of Eliot. He says, try to learn everything about poetic theories. Try to be best in using word, in diction, in grammatical tropes. It gives you power. But when the inspiration comes into your mind, just let all devices go and just follow your inspiration. Because what you have taught before is helping you without you knowing that. So this is part of subjectivity. This has built the subjectivity and the mind of the mystic, but before the experience. So when the experience is happening, I mean by experience, it's like you should not believe in such an experience to enjoy a text. It's like poetry, it is like art. It's part of culture. But what happens to Sufis is that they say it is the audition, hearing things, and seeing things, visionary and auditory experience. By having the experience, that it is not necessarily accompanied by reading Qur'an. It can happen just by looking to the nature. There's no need for a Sufi because it is quite an individual experience.
I was just wondering, what's the modern Islamic point of view towards the Sufis' exegesis or tafsirs? Because to me, as a Sunni Muslim, again, personal point of view, I don't agree with the idea of mysticism in Sufism because, again, according to my understanding, the point is it's not mysticism, it's the beauty of the religion of being divine, because it's a divine revelation, and we as human beings cannot understand, cannot reach this mental and intellectual studs of understanding a divine revelation. So I can understand it in the light of tafsir, in the light of sunnah. That's why we cannot take the tafsir part or away from sunnah. So the sunnah, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is a guide to understanding tafsir. So I was just wondering what's the...
Okay, if I summarize?
Yeah.
So, the question is, according to a Sunni standard way of reading the text, it's very important to have the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad as sort of a standard or a guide to understanding the Qur'an. And because the Qur'an, according to Islamic belief, is a divine revelation. So how can, in this tradition, you remove that standard or guide of the Prophet's tradition and come to an understanding of the text?
Well, this is a very frequent mistake that many people think and suppose that mysticism means removing Sharia and just beginning wherever you like. Well, this is not true because the there are three steps in spirituality which are starting point is Sharia or law, and then it is the path or tariqah, the path. So these two first parts are depart from experience. In the first step, in the beginning, you should know very well. It's like, I remember Picasso. He was talking about modernism and cubism, and he was accused of such a thing that he is defying all classical art. And he said, no, for putting such a painting on the surface, You should know Rembrandt, you should know all previous art, and then you can be a modernist painter. So, in any type of deep understanding, first is knowing the rules, knowing the principles. For Sufis as well, the first part is, I'm not a provocateur, I'm not an advocate of Sufis, but it's just I'm explaining this type of tafsir. But it is very important for them to show and have this alliance with Sharia and the Sirah. So many of them were from Ahl al-Hadith. Ahl al-Hadith, people who were converting sayings of Prophet. And afterwards comes the path, the second stage. It's just learning how to purify yourself from envy and greed. This is still nothing to do with the experience. So in these two parts you are learning and you are quite underground and very, very objective. And here is the Shaykh in Tariqah in the second part. They need but in the third part, to which many of Sufis never reach, most of them never reach to the third part, is haqiqah or truth, the stage of truth. In this part, it is just being overwhelmed by the experience, by the audition, or something that it is above objectivity of the text. So this, the assumption that Sufis dislike or disregard Sharia is not right, if I understand what is your point. Is it?
So if I understand what you're saying, especially with the last sentence that you ended the talk with, right? You said this sort of clash between tafsir approaches is still going on. I mean, I'm wondering if you would comment on the contemporary situation in Iran, because Khomeini himself was a teacher of mysticism, and he wrote commentaries on Mullah Sadra's texts, this other mystical philosopher. So, I mean, how would you make sense of these mystical commentators also then coming into politics and setting up, a certain kind of political system which seems to run against polyphony and dialogue and subjectivity? So if you could say something more about that.
Judging Khomeini as if he is a mystic coming to politics is not my position and state to judge him, and I think this is...
Sorry to interrupt, but Hamid Dabashi at Columbia, he's saying this.
No, it's just, because it needs a very profound studying of every single moment of a person. But generally, I can say that a very great Sufi is not a Sufi and is not a mystic in all moments of his life. The two first parts, the Sharia and the Tariqah, the path and the law, are always with him, always, in all moments. But the third part, the most difficult part, it is very exceptional moments of life that may happen. So, and in these exceptional parts of life, you cannot include all moments of the life in this third part. It is something very exceptional. But if you're asking that, how can I put these two parts together, I can say not anybody, not everybody that writes about mysticism is a mystic. There are lots of scholarly work about mysticism. One of them can be Khomeini, and many others, many clerics could do it, or non-clerics, because it is popular, because of many reasons. But it does not mean that it's just a right of a mystic to write about mysticism. So Khomeini as well, he wrote about Ibn Arabi to show his enthusiasm about him or Mullah Sadra, because it is a part of scholarly work in their path. These clerics, they should know these things, and they should have a special position and stake toward them. This is like going to university and having some courses. So having these courses does not mean that you admit morally and heartily to all of them. You see? But in Iran, still it is, Sufism is very attacked, especially, it is, you're filming off? Sorry.
It's on.
Is it on? Okay. So, no, everybody knows, it's not in Iran, just a few weeks ago I heard in Libya they scrambled down a very sacred place of Sufis. And I see all over the world Sufis are still being attacked because of the same reason that I said. They make room for something that others cannot simply tolerate. And this is the tolerance that Sufis have, to listen to other voices and make room for individuality. And still, yes, we have this clash. And the irony is that the more Sufis are being suppressed, the more mysticism is flourishing all over the world. You see, it was 2002, I think, or 2003, that UNESCO announced that one of the best readers in US is Rumi. But in Iran it's the same. Scholarly work goes on. People still have enthusiasm toward Rumi, toward all these Sufi writers, and clerics do their own work for attacking them and suppressing them. So the struggle still is going on.
Friends, we just heard a talk that gave us Eliot and Ricoeur and Khomeini and Rumi and Picasso. So, and all of this with Dr. Mosharraf, who's just flown in from Tehran and arrived to South Bend yesterday and has jet lag of many, many hours. So this was an extraordinary talk, and I'm very grateful for you, and please join me in thanking him.